Hello and welcome, my super balanced leaves. This video, I have to rant a bit here. Of course, obviously, I did not have to do this video. I do this to myself. On my own, arguably masochistic violations. But let me tell you, while I love the idea, it was hard to do. So what I have done is as I call it, super balanced all the Pokemon types. Meaning each type will get 2 weaknesses, 2 resistances, and 2 immunities. And there will no doubling be here. Also meaning stuff like Dragon against Dragon or Ghost against Ghost. Nope. That's out. That doesn't work. No. It has to be different types all the time. And it was kind of hard, as you will see. Because, first off, I was just going over... Okay, this is just logical. Little spoiler here. Grass will be weak against fire. Oh, surprise! That was easy. I had to do some of these weaknesses, immunities, and resistances. Because they were in the game in the first place and make just so much sense. Then I got into the phase where I was about like, okay, this isn't really in the game, but it would also make sense, so yeah, I guess that works. And then, in the spreadsheet I made for this, there were holes. And you will see that some of these holes need a bit of a stretch of logic to work. Of course, I could have done some things differently, maybe. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. But, well, let me show you what I came up with. And I try to explain everything to the best that I could. But some things, like I said, they are a stretch. Oh, one more thing I want to mention here quickly. I know that this wouldn't be feasible to put into the game. First off, it's in complete disregard on how rare some types are in accordance to how common some other types are. For example, you encounter a lot more water types than you do fairy types, for obvious reasons. Are they that obvious? But yeah, it's a thought experiment, so I let my thoughts run wild. Very wild. Huh. I record this in OBS, and it just showed me that I got a new follower on there. Thanks for following, Zerika Fox. Even you probably won't see this. Okay. Normal type. Starting with the weaknesses. Fighting. Because, hey, I'm a normal dude. I'm a martial artist. Oof. Quite logical. The other weakness I came up with wasn't rock. Yeah, they are weak against rock types in the games. But instead, with how this worked, psychic. Yeah. Why psychic? Well, if you're a normal guy and somebody plays some mind tricks on you, that will confuse you and you will fall for it and he can get a punch in or stuff like that. It does make sense. Psychics are... Okay, that might sound weird, but... Psychics are... better than normal people? You know what I mean. Okay, coming to the resistances. Yeah, normal doesn't really resist anything. So this was a blank slate. But what about bugs? There are some bugs that can actually kill us, but most bugs we can just snip away and they cannot really harm us. Except of a few poisonous ones and stuff. And yes, I am always saying us like I'm a human, which is kind of a normal type, right? But it also goes for most animals. Most bugs really can't harm a typical animal or a human. And the next one would be water? Yeah? We wash ourselves with water. It's normal to wash yourself with water. Water is something we drink. Okay. I guess. For immunities, definitely Ghost. Ghost cannot touch normal. Right? That makes sense in the games. The other immunity would be Fairy. And that might sound strange at first, but depending on the folklore you go by, fairies are helpful little creatures that are peaceful, and instead of wanting to harm you, they want to help you. In a lot of cases, fairies are even in a way that they couldn't hurt you. Like, hurting you would be the most awful thing a fairy could do. That's not what a fairy should do. Thus, they cannot hurt normal. I think that actually makes sense. Okay, grass. Yeah, fire and bug for weaknesses. Obvious. Bugs always eat plants. Fire burns down plants. Even though plants don't burn as easily as you think when they are alive, because they are very moist. For the resistances, electric, because most plants, no, all plants actually, are rooted and, well, goes into earth, makes you immune to electricity, kinda. Then also rock. A lot of plants take roots into rock, and yeah. And you cannot even really smash a plant with a rock. If you had a huge rocky plate and let it fall down onto flowers, those flowers might look kind of broken, but they are very well alive. And in a lot of cases, they can even grow through the rock. Thus, rock makes sense. Immunity, water. Because I thought giving the starter types immunity instead of resistance over the other starter types, that would be interesting. That would mix up gameplay a lot, right? And ground. Because plants usually take root in grounds and absorb their nutrients, and it was one of the few places that second ground immunity would fit. Now for fire, obvious, water is a weakness. The other weakness I have is ghost. Ghosts are also very flicky. They could possess the fire. Yeah, a lot of ghosts, like will-o-wisps, do stuff with fire, so they kind of control fire. And if you have control over something, you can get a hard punch in, I guess. Then we have resistance to steel, because what can steel really do to fire? If you tried cutting fire in half with the sword, yeah, that's not happening. The other resistance would be ice, because it would just melt and then technically douse the flame, but we're gonna ignore that. And then we have the immunities coming to grass, like I said before, for the grass types, as well as... what did I put there? Fighting? And that's one of those where I didn't have much choice. Why is fire immune against fighting? Try punching out a flame. It works for a candle maybe, but not really for a burning building, I guess. Water. Now we are at water. Of course, weakness against grass and electric. Because water actually isn't a good conductor for electricity. What conducts the electricity through the water are the minerals. But given that the water-type Pokemon probably do have iron in their bloods, could still work. But yeah, it's a common misconception. Water, not a good conductor for electricity. but it has a lot of minerals in it usually. If you would take them out, yeah, no, bad chance. Resistance to rock, because if you throw a rock into water, it just engulfs the rock and makes it part of itself, basically. Then we have the other resistance to flying, because wind can change the shape of water, but it will still return to it, and flying type and wind type basically the same, I guess. See what I meant? This was hard, but still fun, but also very hard. Then we have immunities against fire and ghost. Now, ghost was by accident, because I didn't have a lot of slots left for it. But then I thought about it. No, wait. Water being immune to ghost makes a total amount of sense. Because in most beliefs, ghost cannot traverse over or into water. More specifically, running water. But water types can run, I guess. So it makes way more sense than I would have thought. Honestly, they should put this into the actual games. That would be interesting. And teach people about that. About ghosts who might just not exist. So that knowledge basically is useless. But interesting for a fantasy setting after all. Now, electric. Basically my favorite type. Yeah, the weakness against ground types. It does make sense, because ground doesn't conduct electricity, really. And thus, same logic, steel. And before you say it, I know a lot of people wanna have steel types be weak to electric, because steel conducts electricity. Actually, it does not. No, iron does. Yeah, a lot of metals do. Steel, however, is extremely bad at conducting electricity. That's just how it is. That's how it works. No, steel is bad. It makes way more sense that steel is resistant or even immune to electricity. But we will get to steel when the time comes for it. Then we have the resistance to psychic. Psychic cannot ban non-physical things like electricity. Yeah, same reason would work for fire and stuff, but I had to work with my set of rules that I set for myself here. And without that set of rules, this video wouldn't work, so yeah, I chose psychic for that. It was the best fit I could do. Then dark, and that makes a lot of sense. Think about it. The dark type came in Gen 2, but there was darkness in Gen 1 as well. Specifically, dark caves. And you could lighten them up with flash, which is not an electric type move. But even without it being an electric type move, it was able to being taught to a lot of electric types. And in Pokemon Yellow even, you don't need flash. If you talk to Pikachu in the dark cave and it's happy enough, it will light up the cave with its electric powers. So it would be a nice callback to that. The darkness cannot do anything against the light that electricity emits. Honestly, mind blown. Because this was one of the spots where it was like, where could I put dark? And then it just, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, then again, an immunity against flying, because also an immunity against ice, because the ice you could explain as in, well, ice would just melt, because electricity is also hot. The flying? I had nothing, actually. It's why would electric be immune against flying? Basically just because electric is super effective against flying. So, huh. Yeah. If you can think up a reason, tell me. I just couldn't fit it anywhere else. Bugs. The flying type weakness is obvious. And then I gave them a normal type weakness. Because, well, imagine bug. Easy as that. They are weak against normal types. Yeah. It's just hard sometimes with this. Oh, well. Then we have a resistance to poison because a lot of bugs are poisonous themselves. Thus, I thought it makes sense. Another resistance to grass because they just eat grass. Same reason as the weakness for grass. Then an immunity against fighting. Because that actually makes sense. Imagine a fly, right? Now you have this huge martial artist and he, boom, punches it. Extremely fast. He will not hit the bug. Nope. He will not. Why? Because wind. Bugs you cannot drive over with a car as well. Usually. There are some cases where stuff comes together so that they end up splattered on your windshield. But usually the wind you produce due to the speed you punch with, in the case of a fist, will just push the bug out of the way safely, and that is, it flies away, free to attack you. Of course you can clap it like a normal type. Fighting and normal are very closely related, honestly. Fighting is basically like a trained up normal type. That's all. But cut me some slack here. Come on. And the other immunity would be the rock type. A lot of bugs live under rocks. And if you let a rock fall down on a bug, chances are it actually survives that. Don't try it, please. Bugs are living things. Don't just kill them. That's not okay. But usually they won't be killed by that. Of course, it depends on the size and shape of the rock and the bug and stuff. But if we go into that, even fire can beat water. Because a drop of water into a, like, giant flame, yeah, the water won't douse that fire. But it will evaporate. So I guess we can ignore that. Now, flying electric and ice makes sense. Because paralyzed birds cannot fly. And if you freeze their wings, they cannot fly. Fire would actually also make sense because if you singe their wings, they wouldn't be able to fly. Steel would make sense because if you cut their wings, which is something done to chickens, by the way, they cannot fly. There would be a lot, but I decided for electric and ice mainly because they already were weaknesses, so yeah. Resistance to fairy. It was the only spot I had open for that resistance. Fairy was the only choice I had left. It was literally the last thing I put in. I asked my wife if she can come up with something and she said, birds can fly faster? So let's go with that. You could say fairies are kind of insect-y. Like bugs. The other resistance I gave, because bird eat bug. Do with that what you want. Then immunity against ground, because obvious, even though some flying types cannot fly. It shouldn't be immune, but that's how Pokemon works. And lastly, water. Because I actually have a really good explanation for why they are immune to water. Typically, birds' feathers are hydrophobe, meaning that if you put water on them, they won't get wet. The water will just slide off. It will not go into the feather like it would go into your skin. No, it doesn't work. The water just goes off. And I don't know if it's all birds that have that, or only most of them, but at least most of them. And flying and birds, that goes hand in hand. Sure, something like Emolga doesn't make as much sense, but you always have those exceptions with Pokemon. Whatcha! Fighting type. Okay, Ghost and Psychic. Because fighting types, kinda like normal types, cannot touch ghosts. So all fighting types know is how to punch, kinda. And they cannot punch a ghost. So Ghost has the upper hand here. Then Psychic type, yeah, it makes sense. Confuse a martial artist, and what can he do, right? Then for Resistance, Dark. Mainly the same reason, because fighting justice stuff against the dark evil forces, they resist that darkness. They have meditation techniques and stuff against their darker sides to calm down and stuff. Right? Will make sense. Dragon. I put them as resistant to Dragon. They have nothing. Just one of those few empty slots. What can I do? Immune to Rock, because honestly, in fantasy settings specifically, martial artists just can't punch rocks that come at them in half and be unharmed. And normal, because if a normal guy comes up to a martial artist and punches him, the martial artist just stands there and didn't even notice that. Poison. Yeah, this is not poisonous. Don't worry, please. Poison. Ground as a weakness, because ground absorbs poisons. I honestly would say it should be the other way around, but I was just taking what the game gave me anyway, so yeah, I stayed with that. Because if you poison ground, that's bad for the ground, not bad for the poison. And the other one would be ice. And yeah, I tried researching it. Poisons don't really are affected by being frozen, but I was thinking about like poison type could also mean bacteria and germs, and a lot of them, if frozen, will not survive, thus weakness. I guess that's a okay explanation, at least, right? Yeah. Is it? Then we have the resistances to water. Because if you put water into poison, it basically just becomes more poison. Yeah, it gets thinner, but still, it's more like the poison takes on the water instead of the other way around. And fairy. Because fairies aren't good with poisonous stuff. You see a lot of times in media that fairies are suffocating under the trash we produce, the gases, the smoke, all that stuff. So I was going that route. So yeah. Then we have steel as an immunity, because what can metal do to a poison? They actually are poisonous metals even, but yeah, if you put like a metal bar, a steel bar, into something poisonous, chances are nothing will happen, or the steel bar will lose in that case, because it's acid. And acid is included in poison in Pokemon, so yeah. And dark. Because what mischievous things can you do to something poisonous that isn't already something a poisonous thing might do in the first place? Poison is often depicted as evil. I kinda disagree, but for this reasoning, it makes sense. Ghost. First weakness, fairy. Easy to explain. Fairies drive off evil spirits. There we go. Not all ghost types are evil spirits, of course, but you can catch the drift here. Then poison. Again, one of these few spaces left. Fits nothing else, really. So poison and ghost. It's like ghost Pokemon are made out of gas. That only really works for Gen 1 though. And if that poison infiltrates that materia, non-materia that ghosts are made out of, that's bad? Something like that. Well, yeah. Then resistance to fighting types. I didn't have an immunity slot open, but I thought, well, maybe it makes sense. I can make sense of this. And yes, as of Gen 4, fighting types didn't only include the punchy. It also included the aura. So, while the physical punch cannot hit the ghost, thus being significantly weak as an attack, the aura of that punch that fighting types usually use can still hit that ghost. Would be weird for aura sphere and stuff because there's no physical thing attached to that, but Pokemon logic is what we're working with. Come on. Yeah, so that's why it's only a resistance, not an immunity. Even though for ghost, for fighting, I mean, I did say weak to ghosts and stuff, but I think it works that way. Then ground, because ghosts can just go through walls and stuff. Ground cannot do much to them. It can stall them a bit. But yeah. Normal, for obvious reasons. And as an immunity, I should say. And the second immunity, flying. Because I was going about wind attacks and what can wind really do to a ghost. They don't get blown away by that or anything, so that's the best I could come up with. Okay, rock types. The weaknesses, and honestly the weaknesses were the easiest one in this, were rock and... not rock. Rock isn't weak to rock. Rock is weak to fighting because, well, martial artists can punchy through rocky. And grass, because grass just splits rocks in half if they want to grow through it. And they use them for their roots and stuff. As a resistance, it's flying, because birds cannot do much to rocks. And yes, I always say flying and birds, but look at the flying types. Most of them are birds. It was even considered to be the bird type at one point. Then we have normal, because, yeah, if you tried punching a rock, you will be hurt, not the rock. Especially not Dwayne the Rock. Then we have the immunities for fairy. Rock is immune to fairy because... And the other immunity would be electric, because rocks don't conduct electricity, like, at all. So, we have reached ground type. Yeah. When it comes to the ground type, obviously water makes sense, because it makes the ground type to mud. Though a lot of ground type moves are mud, does that really hurt them? Well, I guess it does make sense. It softens them up and all. For the second weakness, I decided on dark. Yeah. You know, a pretty dark technique would be taking sand and throwing it into somebody's eyes. Thus, they rip apart the ground. It works, right? Yeah, it was a hard one again. And with the resistances, this might sound strange, but I put dragon there. Now, my reasoning for that is a little hard to explain, but if dragons are this mythical force of power, what a weird way to phrase that, that is destructive and everything, you could see ground as the whole planet, which is also a pretty huge power, so those two, when clashing, well, the dragons do live on the planet, obviously. Thus, yeah. something like that. It's really not that good of an explanation, I have to say. Especially if we have some dragon types that just come out of space like Rayquaza does. So, yeah. The other one would be Steel, because, well, you could put a sword into the ground, which, well, granted, puts a hole in the ground, but doesn't really destroy it. Even though you could argue the exact opposite as well. But, oh, yeah. Sand can rub on steel and make it coarse and stuff, ultimately destroying it. Maybe that works better. Immunity-wise, yeah, electricity. I mean, electricity cannot go into the ground. It just can't. The ground is the most anti-electricity thing that exists. I think. Maybe an actual physician can tell me otherwise. Well, yeah. And also fire, because have you tried setting sand on fire? You won't have much luck with that. And now the steel type, which fire, because fire can melt steel. Makes sense, I guess. And dragon, because, yeah, my reasoning is you attack dragon with sword. Dragon, well, bites sword and eats it or something. Also, dragons in a lot of cultures are depicted as fire-breathing things, thus the melting part again. Though in Pokemon they are mostly distanced from fire, if they're not also fire types, because imagine dragon type would just be the fire type, but in a different color. Yeah, that wouldn't make sense. But yeah, I guess dragon works. For resistances, normal, basically same reasoning as for rock. A normal guy punching steel, ouch, not for the steel, but for the guy. Then also fighting, because while martial artists can split rocks in two, yeah, splitting steel in two with your fists, even in fantasy settings, not that common. So, I guess it makes sense, yeah. Then we have bug and grass as immunities, because what can a bug actually do against steel or metals in general? And grass, technically plants could grow on steel or metal rather, but if they would, it would probably be on rusted metals, but they usually don't do it because they cannot gather anything from that. No minerals they need or any kind of nutrient or something. So, yeah, and it's really hard for them to actually grab onto the metal, especially if it's like polished and stuff. And I guess that steel type Pokemon polish themselves? Is there any Pokedex entry that mentions that? Huh. Psychic types. Oh my god, a bug! Yeah, they are afraid of bugs. For some reason, I still don't get the reasoning. I know it's people saying it's the basic human fears. Thus, dark. Yeah, we fear darkness. That makes sense, because darkness never was good to us. And the other ones also kind of make sense, but bug I have to disagree with. Yeah, there are people who are afraid of bugs, sure. But there are also people who are afraid of deep water. So why isn't Psychic weak to water types then? You are also pretty afraid of fire because that kills you. Surprise. So why aren't Psychic types weak against fire? If a rock flies at you, you're pretty much afraid of that rock. You could easily say any type is good against Psychic with that reasoning. For Dark and the others, Dark by the way being the second weakness I have chosen. Yeah, okay, but Bug, I kinda have to disagree. What I would rather say though is that Psychic uses your mind a lot. And an insect could just go into your brain like a parasite and stuff. It can do that physically or, well, indirectly. Still kind of physical, but yeah, mess with your brain. Yeah, that works. So bug, still good. As a resistance, I put ghost, which technically was a weakness. But I think if you're hyper intelligent, the supernatural might be something that you can just figure out. And figure out something to do against it, rather. You know? Especially if you put psychic energy into that. That sounds like something that could repel a ghost, honestly. So I think it works better than that. And then poison. I'm going by the logic of you poison someone who's a psychic and they just, through sheer meditation and willpower, fight against that poison very effectively. So, yeah, I think that might make sense. Then, for the immunities, I have ice. Kind of the same reasoning as with poison, because if you are a psychic, or, well, more like a Zen kind of guy, meditating in the cold makes you not feel the cold as much. You know what I mean? I was going by that logic. As well as steel, because you can bend spoons. That's one of the most typical things psychics do, and I guess controlling metals is a psychic thing, and if you can control it, you don't need to fear it, or it cannot damage you, right? Now, dark types. I put rock as a weakness. I have no idea why it was one of the only things that I still had left and couldn't do much different. What could be the reasoning there? I have to admit I have nothing. It's just the space needed to be filled and I only had one choice, so yeah. Dragons, however, I have an explanation for that. Because, yeah, in Western lore, dragons mostly are seen as evil. But let's go over to the Eastern lore, where dragons are actually a force of good, typically. Especially as you are not counted as a dragon anymore if you are evil. See, Gyarados not being a dragon. It does make sense due to that. So, yeah, dragons fighting against dark very effectively, because dragons are powerful. Yeah, that makes sense. Then, for the resistances, ice, because why would a dark type care about the cold? It just adds to its mischievousness? Or something like that? And ghost, because if you're as mischievous and a trickster like dark types tend to be, why would you be afraid of ghosts? You rather use those ghosts at your advantages. So, yeah. For immunities, poison, because I would say someone who is dark would use poison against his enemy and thus develop an immunity against poisons? Kind of. As well as psychic, because they can't get in your head, you're one step ahead. That could work vice versa as well. Which it kinda does, because I made psychic weak against dark as well, so yeah, they have that nice little exchange there. Ice! Well, I put steel and rock as weaknesses. Mainly because you can crush ice with those. Yeah, throw a rock, if it's big enough, of course. Size does matter in that case, but we cannot take that into account when it comes to Pokemon. But in general, I would say if you throw rock and ice against each other, the ice probably would break, not the rock. Same with steel. Also, you can drill through ice, and drills are usually made out of some kind of metal. Not necessarily steel, but not all steel types are made out of steel. Thus, it should be the metal type. And metal is the commonly used word for that element in other media. So why did Pokemon do steel types? Weird. Yeah, but for resistances, grass, because they would freeze the water inside of the plants, thus making them slower and weaker. That works. Fire, because fire has a hard time to even go off in the cold. Even though fire could melt the ice, but oh well. It's again a nice little exchange because fire is also resistant to ice, according to my table here. Then we have the immunities of dark, because ice just gets stronger when it's dark. Darkness brings coldness with it. So yeah. And dragon. Ice being immune against dragon is just... I don't know. I really don't. It's again one of those few spaces left and nothing else fit better. So maybe because the cold slows down dragons, because they are lizards, even though not all dragons are lizardy, but in Pokemon usually they are. Yeah, I guess let's go with that. Penultimately, fairy. Weak to flying, kind of the same reason I gave flying being resistant to fairy, which is my wife's reason of they can fly faster. It's such a bad reason, but honestly, my hands were tied, and even trying to change some things up, nothing better was coming out of it, so yeah. Then normal, because, well, fairy tries to protect normal people. What I said as a reasoning for normal being immune to fairy. But normal people can just do fairy and fairy dead. Done. Out. Bye. That would be mean and technically would make them dark types, rather. But, oh well, I think it fit because, again, here we are. Okay. The resistance is ground because fairies can fly. But that doesn't make them immune like flying types for some reason. I don't know. And psychic, because yeah, it kind of works as something you could try on fairies. Like, try playing with their minds, but fairies probably won't be taken aback by that. It would be easier if fairies were real. Or psychics. Because every interaction between two fantasy types as these, you can just explain in any way, and it kind of makes sense always, because none of those really exist, and thus everything kinda goes. But oh well. I kept the dragon immunity because of the whole folklore fairies are effective against dragons, or fairy magic is thingy, and poison. Because I think fairies are so pure that if they get poisoned, they get immediately purified. You could still poison them with poisonous attacks, but that's a different thing. And then, finally, dragon. Yeah, I know I said dragons getting slower in ice because lizardy and stuff. Though, to make this work, I had to remove the ice weakness. The fairy weakness is still there. The other weakness would be poison. My reasoning is because if you have this huge and mighty powerful being, if you get poison into it, it doesn't matter how strong it is. It will just take it down. Like, you fight against an elephant. Yeah, you don't have a chance against an elephant, I would say. He would trample you down. But you have one little dart with a poisonous tip, a very lethal poison even for an elephant. You only need to get this dart into the elephant and you have won. You might still die, granted, but you would kill that elephant. Still. Without much effort, honestly. Just due to poison. That's my reasoning for this. Is it a good reasoning? Tell me in the comments. So, yeah. Resistances. Yeah, I do love how Dragon resists the starter types plus electric. Of course, with only 2 resistances, I couldn't keep that up. So I put it as fire and electric. Mainly because a lot of dragons are associated with fire in folklore. And some also in eastern countries with electricity. Though more water and wind. But I had water and flying already for something else. Thus I chose electricity because, I mean, it would be kind of a cool image. Just imagine a dragon flying through the sky. A lightning storm goes straight into that dragon. And it doesn't even care. That's a cool image. For immunities, psychic, because dragons tend to be very intelligent. Depending on the folklore again, but we cannot consider all the folklores for everything. We wouldn't get anywhere with that. But I think they could outwit psychics. Well, yeah. They have a strong will and everything. As well as bug. Yeah, I mean, what can a bug do against a dragon? I mean, come on. It's literally the biggest and mightiest being against the smallest and weakest being. Disclaimer, not all dragons are all powerful and not all bugs are totally weak in Pokemon, but you know, it still works, right? Whoa, no, okay. That was a lot of mind bending here. I know, but still, tell me in the comments what you thought about this idea. But please, don't think of it as something I want in the game, because I really don't. But as a nice little thought experiment of how it could be, instead of how it should be. Because mostly the type resistances and weaknesses are fine like they are. Mostly. I would change some, but not in this way. Yeah, and well, what would you change? What would you do if you had this set of rules? So, looking forward to your opinion on that. This video was a lot of work. Not even a lot of writing or anything, just a lot of thinking what makes sense. And still not everything makes sense. My sanity has taken a hit here. Yeah, also find your matchup type by clicking the like and subscribe button as well as that little bell to keep updated whenever I upload a new video for you. And check out the links down in the description below leading to my Twitter, Instagram and Discord where I post stuff, keep you updated, all the good things, as well as to the Humble Store where I have an affiliate link and my merch store where you can get stuff like this nice shirt. And finally, my Twitch, where I live stream every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. I hope to see you over there as well, and until next time, bye-bye!